Hello everyone, this is part 9 of What If Naruto Had Wolverine's Powers. Enjoy. Staring out across the water, Naruto stretched. It was a clear day, and he could make out the coast of Umi no Kuni in the distance. The journey to this port town at the southern end of Cha no Kuni had been slower than they'd expected. The standard shinobi mode of travel, leaping through the trees from branch to branch, was complicated by his and Hinata's new form of chakra, as was their ability to utilize chakra to climb trees and walk on water. The fluctuations in their chakra flow were enough to disrupt those exercises. The shinobi couple were driven back to the basics in this matter, a state of affairs they were decidedly less than pleased about. The previous evening had seen them striving to balance their chakra enough to climb a rather large and sturdy oak, yet where they didn't slip or stick, they blasted chunks of wood to splinters. It still needed a great deal of work, as did the water walking. It was just as well that they'd brought several extra changes of clothes, with the failure rate of the water walking exercise, and the leaf floating exercise which was considered so basic either shredded the leaves or launched them skywards hard enough for them to catch fire. Hinata, however, came up with an idea that was rather unusual, but showed some promise: skating. The idea was that, since they could possibly destroy a great number of trees before mastering the climbing exercise, she estimated that at the current rate, they'd have to change the village's name from Konohagakure no Sato, or the village hidden in the leaves, to Teichigakure no Sato, the village hidden in the plain. Likewise, they didn't want to constantly be stopping to change their clothes every time they tried to cross a river using the water walking technique. No matter how much Hinata and Naruto might have enjoyed this, it would slow down their missions. Plural. Because to cover their Konoha granted B to S rank, as yet to be determined by whoever they encountered, Tsunade had, in her role as Hokage, given them another mission, an ambiguous C rank to find out what was interfering with Umi no Kuni's payments to Mizu no Kuni for naval protection. Since the payments weren't arriving, the Mizu Navy was no longer obligated to defend the traffic from Umi. Of course, first they had to get there. The only thing that had kept them from running late on their schedule had been the increased speed and endurance that the Uzumaki shinobi had gained from their transformation. Thus, skating, the concept of pushing just enough chakra through their feet to lift them from the ground, while at the same time making that chakra smooth enough that they could skate along on it, at least until their control was good enough to travel normally. Thus they'd practiced chakra control as they traveled. While he doubted his own control was good enough for the water walking exercise as yet, Hinata had much better control, and better yet, she was able to see what she was doing, and adjust it accordingly. Her being able to tell him where he was making a mistake certainly reduced the number of times he was sent flying by a mistake in the exercise. Grinning at the view, Naruto went back into the inn to find his wife. Karin spoke quietly with the man before her, the captain of a ship headed for Umi no Kuni. "That should be enough for our passage, Captain," she said, indicating the stacks of ryo on the table. "So what is making you so very reluctant?" "Monsters," he replied flatly. "I saw one of those ships that was destroyed once they'd found it. Something had taken a huge bite out of the side of it. I could see the teeth marks, and whatever it was, the mouth was at least as wide as I am tall. The captain was a giant of a man, too, at least 7 feet tall. That meant a big creature. I can get you to this side of the main island, but from there you'll be on your own, and probably stranded until the monster or monsters are destroyed." Karin raised an eyebrow. "Monsters?" The grizzled man rose. "I've seen many things none would believe in my years on the sea," he replied. "But never have I seen in nature a creature that didn't come in male and female. Anyway, we leave on the morning tide." He gathered up the money. "Do you have an objection with a short stop along the way?" the red-eyed Jonin asked. Hinata scanned the compound ahead with her Byakugan. "Empty," she stated, as she ceased the flow of chakra to her eyes. A sniff or two of the air, dusty and damp, redolent with salt, and she spoke again. "It's been abandoned for years. There's a room down the left passage that smells somewhat familiar, although I can't tell why." As Shino sent a wave of Kakaichu to scout the corridor in question, Naruto was performing the hand signs of the summoning jutsu, snapping out crisp words as he did. "Kuchi Yosei no Jutsu, Mongoose triplets." With a small cloud of smoke they appeared, each of the 3 mongoose summons roughly the size of a wolf. Riki, the oldest triplet, had a blue jacket and a black collar with a bronze bell on it, while his brother Taki wore a yellow jacket and a black iron bell. The youngest triplet, and the only girl, Tavi, wore a red jacket and gold bell, but also had a red ribbon tied around her head like a Hittite. She was the one who did the speaking. "What do you need us for, Nissan?" Naruto grinned. "This place was set up by Snake Lips, guys," he explained, gaining their immediate and total attention. All mongooses were curious and playful, but one mention of the S word, snake, had them become serious, efficient engines of speed and devastation. "We need scouts who can handle the traps he might have set up, and I couldn't think of any better team than you three. We have this side covered," here he pointed to the left side of the complex, "and if you guys can cover that side," he indicated the right, "then I'll get you all some shrimp ramen before I send you home." "Deal." Three high and clear voices responded as the mongoose summons left little mongoose-shaped clouds of dust behind. "Such a deal." Team Kerr and I was thorough. After finding nothing, they set explosive tags and incendiaries to reduce the base to ash and rubble. With the eager assistance of the mongoose triplets, the work went swiftly, except when the time came to activate the tags. The fluctuations in their chakra meant it took a few tries for Naruto and Hinata to set theirs off. As the four of them, 7 counting Naruto's summons, strode towards the beach and the waiting ship, the destroyed compound blazed fiercely behind them, fiercely enough to reduce even the stones to gravel from the heat. As the 4 shinobi sped across the main island of Umi no Kuni, with Hinata and Naruto finally managing to achieve sufficient control of their new chakra for arboreal travel, another Konoha team was arriving in a far drier land. There on the border a guide was waiting for them, a familiar-looking blonde whose hair was in 4 short pigtails and who carried a massive fan. "So you would be the inspectors from Konoha?" she asked, standing a good distance back from the border. "I'm here to get you to Suna. Sabaku no Temari, at your service." Her voice held no great warmth for the Konoha ninja, but nor was she openly hostile. "We'd better get moving. Desert travel is a little different to what you're used to. To make the best time, we're going to use a technique we call sand skimming. It's similar in nature to the water walking techniques, but you have to take into account the differences between sand and water, and their similarities. Once we have that down, what else do we have to worry about?" Shikamaru asked. Sakura was unable to bring herself to step up and speak, her missing arm seemingly having taken a large portion of her confidence with it. "Desert survival is something we rarely needed in Hai no Kuni." Temari raised the corner of her mouth in a half-smile that acknowledged the dry humor in the young Chunan's sarcastic statement. "In the desert, the best place to carry your water is inside yourself. Water jutsu are severely disadvantaged here unless you know the real trick of their use. Never travel during the height of the day unless there is no other choice. Midday kills, and midnight is cold enough we'd have snow if there were enough water in the air for it. We travel at night, select watches for the day, keep an abundance of water sealed somewhere on our persons and a fair amount of food and salt too. My advice, always have a knowledgeable guide," she said, smiling slightly. "Now, once you've got sand skimming under your belt, we'd better get moving." Naruto stood on the beach looking towards the docks where the ships were being loaded. This was the 4th gold shipment that Umi no Kuni would attempt. They were taking no chances they didn't have to. Scraping together the amount required for a C rank had apparently strained the island nation's budget, but they had warned the Hokage that there was a chance, and likely a good chance at that the mission could wind up being more dangerous than they estimated. Naruto saw the girl emerging from the shack at the far end of the beach at the same time as he noticed the children. He couldn't think of them as anything else, even if 1 or 2 were a year or so older than he by the look of things, picking up rocks and sticks. A low growl came to his attention, and even as he realized it was his, he was approaching the would-be thugs. At that, he was a touch late, as the ringleader hurled a stone and yelled angrily. "Get lost, freak. We don't want you here, you monster." Isaribi saw the rock leave the boy's hand, and her eyes widened. Again they were attacking her because she was different, and with her bandages covering large sections of her body, she couldn't really deny it. With what had happened to her, she could have killed them, easily, as they all helped with the fishing at some point or another, but all the girl really wanted was a cure. Some way to reverse her unasked-for condition. Clenching her eyes shut, knowing she was unable to avoid the rock, she waited for it to hit, and waited. Cracking open her left eye, she peered around. She'd been sure that rock was going to hit her. There in front of her stood a boy of about the same age as she, wearing a long dark orange coat with black flames about the hem, and a red spiral square in the middle of his back. His left hand was extended, gripping the rock that would have struck her, and her eyes noted a plain gold band on his third finger, the ring finger. He squeezed the rock hard as the children began to berate the stranger for interfering with them dealing with the monster, and she knew he'd hate her now. As he looked over his shoulder, she met his gaze with her own as he took in her bandages and their odd placement about her body, bracing herself for the rejection and hate. "Where?" he asked, shocking her, and surprising the would-be mob. "All I see is a girl who needed help. My Hinata Heim would never forgive me. Heck, I would never forgive me, if I didn't help those I could." Turning back to the children gathered ahead of him, he snarled, and the heat I ate around his neck gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. "I've seen and fought real monsters before, and the worst ones. They were as human as you children, and as judgmental of anything that didn't fit their narrow views." With a final squeeze, the rock, only sandstone, but still a rock, crumbled in his fist. Dropping the fragments, he left, and Isaribi wondered what his game was. In the shadows of an alley, two figures watched this scene play out. The stockier of the two turned to the taller and thinner man. "That's the Uzumaki brat from the exams, isn't it?" At his partner's nod, the first man grinned beneath his mask. "So that means we get a shot at destroying him, and probably those other freaks in his team, too. Go tell Amachi, and I'll let little fishy Ribby know what her orders are." The two quickly parted ways, and the stockier man smirked. He might well enjoy this job for once. Breaking a Konoha nin down for research material, as Amachi called it, would just be fun. Naruto spoke quietly as he reported to the red-eyed Jonin. She was angry, but not at the villagers. "Well, maybe a little, but she wasn't about to attack them," he said. "She's the odd one out around here, not treated particularly well. She reminded me of me, a bit, and she smelled like a sea creature. There's a depth to the salty scent that you don't get unless you are one. I don't know, she just smelled fishy." The light slapped to his shoulder, a playful gesture, knocked him over, and Hinata gasped, then began apologizing profusely. The small amount of time since the event that had transformed them meant she still wasn't completely used to her new strength yet. Naruto took it in stride, laughing and waving it off. The two of them had recently reset their gravity seals to 6 and 7, with Hinata being at 6 and rapidly catching up to her husband. Jiraiya had told him to be careful adjusting them to anything higher than 5, as most humans, including, much to their sorrow, Maito Guy and Rock Lee, couldn't handle the strain on their internal organs. Of course, they deactivated them for the water walking exercise, or when aboard a ship. With their current level of control, falling into the water with that much extra weight would hinder their ability to swim, significantly. And the ocean was a little damp. Sakura stared at Kankuro. It was disturbing in a way, almost disconcerting. The slightly older boy wasn't wearing his war paint. "What?" he asked, indignantly. "Is there something wrong with my face? Does it not cover the front of my head like it should? Is it not sufficiently face-shaped?" His sarcastic questions dragged Sakura from the near trance she'd entered on seeing the Suna puppeteer. She'd spaced out, not even hearing the Suna medic nearby introducing himself. Sorry," she ventured. "If you're this good-looking, why the paint?" She covered her mouth, shocked at the words she'd just spoken. That had sounded like something her inner Sakura would say. The pink-haired Kunoichi thought quickly and hard. She hadn't actually had any conversations with herself since that incident. Even in her mind she shied away from the thought that she had killed Sasuke. "I've heard that question before," the dark-haired Suna ninja said. "The simple answer is, because of the handsomeness. Girls are always about the looks, never about the skills. With the paint, the first thing they see is the puppets, and anyone who can't see past the dolls that I play with isn't someone worth knowing." Sakura's reaction surprised him, a little, given her attitude during the Chunin exams. She simply nodded. "That makes sense," she said. She looked at the puppets that were arrayed against the young man's wall. "These are well made, if that helps," she noted. Tsunade-sama, the Hokage, suggested that a combination of puppet mastery and medical jutsu might help with my handicap. Rolling his eyes, Kankuro reached for an unattached arm blank of about the right size. "I'll go out on a limb here," he replied, "and guess your attempt at humor is supposed to disarm me." Sakura groaned at his puns, as she scanned her mind for others. Making fun of her own disability was a coping mechanism, but it was one that was working. with Kankuro making it into a contest as he measured the arm against her. This might not be as bad as she dreaded. It didn't work, I'll just have to shoulder the burden. But on the other hand, the situation is a little humorous. It was Kankuro's turn to groan as he searched for other arm-related puns, and Temari watched the duel of bad humor with something akin to astonishment. The ocean was smooth, relatively speaking. With Team Karin aboard, the ship began its journey to the turnover point where the Mizu vessels would take the cargo the rest of the way. Naruto and Hinata were meditating at the bow, twitching each muscle a fraction as they tested their strength with neither weights nor seals to burden them. After their training they felt extraordinarily light and fast, and it would take time to get used to the switch between the two. With the stern of the boat covered by Shino and his Kakaichu beetles, Karin stood by the helmsman's station, coordinating. With the heightened senses of hearing that each of her Chunin possessed, she could speak normally, hear, and they would still hear her. It was a decent deployment in case of ambush, but if this whole thing was set up by who or whatever was destroying the ships. Naruto snarled and Hinata privately agreed with him. Out here on the open sea, the smell of salt was so strong, so overpowering, that someone had to be nearly too close in order to smell them at all. It was strange to her, getting used to this new and distracting sense of smell, so much more powerful than she'd ever thought. Her respect for Naruto grew even more, and as for Kiba, well, she still respected him. How did they manage to sift through all the smells they found? Naruto's only hint of what was about to occur was the slight rippling of the water ahead. He heard it just as the ship shuddered to a dead stop, rocking the whole vessel lengthwise on its keel, as Naruto sprang to his feet, extending his arm so Hinata could catch hold of it as she too leaped up, both drawing themselves to the deck with the tree climbing technique. The tentacle that came over the edge of the ship, a translucent watery thing with a number of thicker lumps in it, rendered these valiant efforts futile as it swept them heavily from the deck, toward the rocks to port, not that far from what looked like a large rocky island. The tentacle belonged to some weird creature, and standing on top of that creature was a man in a white lab coat and a grey suit beneath it that resembled the ones Naruto had last seen on the proctors at the Chunin exams. Speaking of which, he knew that smell. He crashed into the grip of a man who promptly stretched his arms around the Jinchuriki, entangling and trapping him, as his stockier partner grabbed at Hinata's arm and pulled her from her husband's grasp. Yowa and Misumi, Naruto thought, wishing he'd been able to identify them a few moments earlier, even as Misumi placed a rebreather across his own face and dragged the blonde shinobi into the depths. With Naruto's current buoyancy, they swam like a brick of gold, very, very fast, but only straight down. Naruto, Hinata cried out, seeing her true love disappear into the water, even as a young woman with scales and fins leaped from the water to lash out at Shino, while Karin was kept busy fighting the sea monster, literally a monster that seemed to be made from seawater, and the man guiding it. Her captor chuckled villainously. Yowa seemed to be enjoying this as he grabbed the girl with his other hand, and initiated his chakra-draining ability. "Don't struggle, pretty thing," he leered, although she couldn't see what his face looked like under the veil he wore. "I'll take better care of you than that boyfriend ever could, now that he's good as dead. But to be on the safe side, I think I'll drain all your chakra first. Do you feel that, the massive flow of energy from you to me?" Hinata was puzzled, and let it show. No. I don't feel anything. And about that, are you sure it's chakra?" The confused look on Yoroi's face was lifted by the burning sensation that began in his hands and slowly spread up his arms, following the pathways the stolen chakra had taken as he dropped the girl and began to scream. "How? What did you do to me? Uaarrgh." Hinata looked at him with a glacial expression, cold and unforgiving, an understandable expression given his threats. "Me? Nothing. You did this to yourself. Didn't your mother tell you not to take things that weren't yours?" she replied as the heavy man's screams grew to incoherency. "If you'd asked I'd have told you. Mayuki is toxic to your chakra coils." She drew some of her chakra, she had plenty left, and gathered it in her hands as she attacked. Gentle storm, cerebral hurricane. Driving her palm dead center into Yoroi's forehead, she watched dispassionately as the other shinobi skipped across the waves before sinking into the deeps. Beneath the water, Naruto had managed to get a good lungful of air before Misumi dragged him under. Feeding chakra into his skeleton brought forth his spikes and blades, and since he didn't want the ninja on his back escaping easily, the bone metal wielder barbed him as they sprang forth. Unfortunately, The elastic ninja felt the blades emerging, and kicked loose of Naruto before the skeletal protrusions could reach him. Naruto would have cursed, could he afford the air? This environment favored the enemy, he could see, and although the skipping splashes overhead indicated Yoroi's defeat, and thus his Hinata Heime's victory, the blonde Jinchuriki had to focus here and now. His elemental jutsu wouldn't help here. Fire was useless underwater, lightning was as much a danger to him as to his enemy, and wind simply had nothing to work with. Slashing with his claws was going to be futile, thanks to the water resistance, and his bone metal significantly hampered his movement options. If he tried to surface, Misumi would have him again, and if he didn't, he'd run out of air. He hoped the others were doing better than he. Shino ducked and dodged as best he could, but this girl was both fast and strong. If she'd had any shinobi training at all, or if her heart had actually been in this, he would have been in big trouble. As it was, she was simply attempting to grab him, likely to hurl him into the water in the hopes that his own colonies would finish him off. Exerting his chakra, the young Aburame sent out his beetles. With the girl's scales and her amphibious nature, the likelihood they'd have the time to drain her chakra was minimal. Instead, his beetles were for something else. Aburame Hajutsu, Kakaichu Shock Storm. The calm, passionless voice gave the girl a moment of the chills, and Shino's beetles sparked with his lightning chakra even as his earth chakra insulated them from the side effects of the jutsu. With a sharp crack of light and noise, and the sudden smell of ozone, the altered girl went down. Far too easy, Shino commented as he turned to aid his sensei, even as Hinata sprang back over the railing. Amachi was raging. This wasn't supposed to happen. Orochimaru-sama was supposed to come here in a month's time to see the progress Amachi was making, and possibly give the go-ahead to break that redhead he'd left here, the one who kept whining about finding her sister. Annoying, but tolerable. Now, he had these ninja interfering with his testing schedule, and preventing the acquisition of funding. This research wasn't cheap, by any means, and generally ticking him off. That woman was interfering with his Umipozu's senses somehow, an impressive feat, given that it didn't have any perceivable sensory organs, and holding it in him back. If he rose above the deck to guide it, she threw kunai at him, and if he didn't she kept hurling explosive tags that kept the sea monster from destroying the vessel. Watching Isuri be taken down so easily wasn't helping, as it meant he needed better base material for the warriors he wanted to perfect before he made himself into one. That purple-eyed girl jumping back onto the ship didn't bode well for the fate of Yowa, so that one wasn't good material for the task either. As he frantically conceived and discarded plans to fight, he smirked. Who'd have thought that useless Misumi would be the best suited? Misumi was wondering what was going on up there, and if he'd be able to finish his enemy in time to claim a piece of the action from Yowa. Since Kabuto's disappearance, they'd been very low-rung men on Orochimaru's ladder, hence this assignment. And now he got to kill this brat. Orochimaru would definitely have a reward for this one's body, it was just a matter of getting hold of it. With his rebreather good for 15 minutes, Misumi would be easily able to drown this little monster, if he could figure out what he was up to. Naruto had extended his claws, and was building a Rasengan in each hand, against the resistance of the water, with some side effects. He couldn't push wind or lightning chakra into his claws down here, so he tried to find and push in some fire-aspected chakra. The bubbles boiling around them indicated some success, even if it wasn't the wildfires he'd have managed were he above the water. Bending the shape of his claws with his chakra, the young shinobi formed a guiding spiral with them. They would revert to normal once he stopped channeling his chakra into them, but that was more than fine by him. The dual Rasengan were tugging at the water around them, drawing it into a pair of maelstroms, vortexes of destructive water currents bent on destroying that which they trapped, and the renegade ninja was dragged in as well, his elongated limbs a disadvantage now, as he was left with the choice of losing limbs or being pulled along. Naruto grinned, taking advantage of the air pocket the currents forced into existence between them to roar out his new attack's improvised name. Rasenjutsu, double maelstrom fists. Karin was tiring quickly. The genjutsu she was using on this creature was chewing through her chakra reserves fast, and it was still all she could do to get it to miss more often than not. Shino's Kakaichi were of little help against it as she strove to find a way to beat it. Hinata, she called out. See if you can isolate and strike this thing's vitals. The younger Kunoichi activated her Byakugan, idly wondering if she was going to have to call it something else now. The Shigan, maybe? Purple Eye? It might need some polish. As she scanned the creature, she noted a lack of chakra coils. It was as though the entire creature were a chakra-based construct, or a summons, but there were 7 centralized pools of chakra that should be vulnerable. Pushing her violet chakra into her hands, she lashed out at the tentacle as it rushed past, unleashing the gentle storm. The pulse of energy burst through the creature, disrupting the lumps, the chakra centers, causing them to explode, and the seawater that made the tentacle to splash across the deck. Unfortunately, the 6th center had detonated before the chakra pulse could reach it, cutting off the tentacle before the energy could disrupt the whole creature, but Hinata had bought a little time. Even as the creature began to regrow its centers, spiraling each out at the end of its own tentacle, Hinata relayed the information she'd gathered. It's some kind of summon, she called to Karin and Shino, as the 3 shinobi ran to the rail and looked over at the lab coat-wearing ninja researcher. Amachi snarled. He'd been fooled by those purple eyes, but that girl had to be a Hyuga, to see and target the chakra centers like that, but even they couldn't cause such a pulse, at least not that he knew of. Obviously he needed more up-to-date data, and dissecting these fools should get that information for him. As he braced to attack, he caught a glimpse from the corners of his eyes of 2 whirlpools forming, one on each side of his umipozu, and noticed a sense of dread. The double maelstroms that Naruto unleashed upwards, forcing the hapless Misumi through a terrifying and apparently endless figure-8 pattern as they drove him relentlessly up, past the surface in a twin waterspout that also tore through the center of the sea monster as it threw the highly resilient rogue ninja into the air, high enough that coming down on the ocean was as good as landing on solid granite. Amachi was thrown into the water in an attempt to avoid the attack, only to find that the water wasn't there, and something hard slammed into his gut as it grabbed him from midair as it catapulted from the ocean floor to the waiting ship, a fraction of a second ahead of the returning ocean. As Naruto landed on the deck, the winded researcher slung over the shoulder he'd driven into the man's belly, even as Misumi plummeted screaming to the ocean, a scream cut short by a loud crack as he slapped face first to the surface. The Jinchuriki straightened up, dumping the man across his shoulder to the deck. "Look, Kurenai-sensei," he said, a real and fox-like grin upon his face. "Instant answers, just add fear." Sakura strained her control, moving her chakra sluggishly into the artificial arm. The wood had been harvested from the same trees that supplied the chakra-sensitive paper that revealed elemental affinities, and was specially treated before being put to this purpose. Kankuro had carved ornate channels into the wood as he assembled the limb, and those channels held chakra-sensitive metal, to act as an artificial chakra system for the intended recipient. Then over that he'd plated more wood, and secured the whole thing with leather and plates of steel. The shoulder had been tricky, trying to find a way to both pad the joint and connect a chakra-based link that enabled her to use it. After all that, she now had to get used to the feeling of the arm so she could move it around. There was no way for him to replace her sense of touch, though, so they'd also been working on her left-hand skills. The pink-haired Kunoichi was struggling with her chakra, and showed it, finally letting the arm dangle limp in its harness. Although it was possible to secure the artificial arm to the shoulder in a permanent fashion, it was deemed, by the puppet maker himself, Kankuro, to be better to finalize all the adjustments and complete the regular training before that happened. After a few moments' rest, and a quick drink of water, Sakura set herself to practice again. With the information that Kurenai had ensured Amachi was only too eager to provide, the threat to slow roast the man's bollocks without removing him first was particularly effective. The small group of shinobi, with both their prisoners in tow, entered the research facility hidden on the island. It was the work of minutes to find the cells with a guide, however grouchy that guide may have been. As Hinata unlocked the doors to release the surviving prisoners, Amachi grumbled about losing research material, until Kurenai offered to let him research his own double orchidectomy, and the bound researcher cringed in an attempt to protect his apples. Naruto began scouring the copious notes that Amachi had taken. "There's a lot here on making these aquatic people," he remarked, but there's no sign of any attempt to cure or reverse the procedure. He saw the girl's shoulders slump as he spoke. "I guess he was just going to kill anyone who turned on him. Enhanced strength, speed, the ability to transform back and forth at will. I'd guess he was planning on perfecting the process and using it on himself. Any failures would be disposed of, read that as killed, once they were of no use." "Naruto," Hinata called out. "I've found her." The young ninja wasted no time, following his wife's voice down the corridors to a cell that held a young woman, a girl really, of about their own age. Her outfit had clearly seen better days, and there were bite marks all up and down her arms. Not scars, but recent enough that they hadn't fully healed. Karin, is it? Naruto asked, and the nervous-looking girl nodded. Tayuya couldn't make it. Sorry, one of Orochimaru's plans backfired on him, and she was caught by the target. Konoha, they sent us to get you and bring you home. Karin looked at this boy, barely her own age, if that. That sick and twisted Amachi was their prisoner, which meant they were good enough to take him down, and from what she'd heard, those two ninja Orochimaru had sent here to keep an eye on him were out of the picture. Home? She stammered. Where's that supposed to be? In a village that didn't help when Uzu no Kuni was destroyed by Iwa and Kumo once the Yellow Flash was dead. What makes you think I'd go along with that? Naruto glanced across to Hinata, then back to Karin. No better alternative? Besides, it'd be different, you'd be with family. The girl snorted. What? Now I get to share a cell with my sister. Real nice of you. Hinata smiled sadly. Well, if you really want to. At the pale shade that spread across Karin's face she almost laughed. But we thought you'd both like to live with your clan. The stunned expression that swept across the redhead's face was amusing, and Naruto turned to Kurenai. Sensei, are we all set? The Jonin nodded. Shino sealed the notes and his Kakaichu are setting the tags as we speak. Most of the prisoners here made a break for freedom, but I used prison scrolls on a few. They're in the bingo book for things like murder, and worse. Having been Kurenai's Genin, they knew very well what she meant by worse. Making a mental note to have Karin receive a full medical check from Tsunade herself, he turned to her, the girl they'd just rescued. So would you like to come and at least talk to Tayuya-chan before you make a decision? Until you make a choice, I'm sure we can look after you. There's more than a few unused rooms at our place, he said, extending his hand. Karin was hesitant, not entirely trusting. Why should I trust you? Who's this family you claim I'd be staying with? There's no Uzu Shinobi in Konoha that I heard of since the Kyuubi killed the last one. Naruto stood, rubbing the back of his neck as Hinata giggled, a light tinkling sound that sent shivers up his spine. Good ones. That would be Tayuya of course, but there's a few others, as she wouldn't be enough on her own, he replied. But our clan representative on the council spoke up in her favor, and the clan head has given her a room, so there won't be much more effort adding you to the deal. In fact, she traded information on Orochimaru to get this mission going for you, even if it wasn't in the clan's interests to do so. As Karin stared at him, torn between fear and anger, fear that this was all a hoax, a lie, that would be used to dash her hopes and humiliate her, and anger that they'd used Tayuya and the influence of clan and family to taunt her like this. Naruto paused to watch. When she'd schooled herself to patience, the anger a little stronger than the fear, he went on. Family and clan are here to save you, Uzumaki Karin. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, this is my wife Uzumaki Hinata, our teammate Aburame Shino and our Jonin captain, Yuhi Kurenai. We're here to bring you home, to the Uzumaki district in Konoha. It was one shock too many, and the girl's eyes rolled back in her head as she fainted. Yugito and B looked around carefully. Due to their current status in the Kumo bingo books, B had been so upset by the declaration his father had made that he'd lost interest in making up rap, something that A and Yugito were thankful for. Neither was wearing their Kumo Part-8, and now the two Jinchuriki were exploring Konoha, or rather, the non-shinobi sections of Konoha. As Kumo shinobi, they hadn't expected access to any of the ninja areas, so receiving such permission as to look over the Konoha Academy had been a surprise. As they watched the various children practicing with kunai and shuriken, knowing they were being carefully watched by Anbu, a precaution any cage would have to take, they were mildly surprised at how they were being treated. They'd recognized the guides. The team that the Raikage had sent to the Chunin exams with secret orders to steal a Byakugan child from the Hyuga's main house. Yugito had never quite understood aspects on both sides of that conflict. Why hadn't the Raikage simply entered into negotiations with the elders of that clan to expand their influence into another village? With a very little amount of effort, and some compromise, it could have been mutually beneficial. Of course, there would have been issues of loyalty, with the clan spread out between two villages like that, but a treaty or two with Konoha, whose biggest proponent of war had been that Danzo fellow, and that would have been settled. She shook her head for a moment. Of course, The Raikage felt that open war was the way to measure a hidden village's strength, but they were Shinobi. Open war was supposed to be the last resort, not the first. B was looking around, too, noting the blend between function and fashion, utility and appearance, that was all around them. He waved over the guide for the day. Suzume, her sister Fukuro, was helping some Inuzuka at the academy today. In fact, he could see her from where he stood, demonstrating the benefits of animal partners, and explaining the responsibilities. The diminutive kunoichi didn't look very dangerous, but then neither did one of those tiny blue-ringed octopuses from the tropics. Yo, girl, where can I unfurl? Just lay about and let it all hang out. He winced. Apparently not making up rap was going to be harder than he'd thought, although, if he thought about it, that one had actually felt better than the ones he forced. Maybe it was that the subconscious stuff bounced better. I just mean, we need some space to let our minds go and fall into place. Yugito was slack-jawed, inwardly, at least. No sense in letting it show just yet, at B's sudden facility with the way the words fit together. Then she twigged to the concept. He wasn't trying to rap any longer, he simply did. Somewhere to sit and think would be nice, thanks, she agreed after she'd recovered. Somewhere peaceful, I think. Suzume nodded. This way then, she said, leading them towards the biggest landmark in the village, the Hokage Monument. There's a big park up there, she continued, pointing, as well as several training grounds. There'll be somewhere suited to sit and discuss what you want to do, how to share your burdens, whether or not Kumo or Konoha is trustworthy. I mean, the choice we made might not be for you, so you may even need to think of alternatives. As they turned to go, they were approached by a quartet of youngsters, with a couple of extra tag-alongs drifting behind them. Among them was a Hyuga girl. Yugito sighed. This was going to be awkward, she knew it. Excuse me, Kumo-san, Hanabi said, speaking directly to B. Could you explain something for me, please? Why does the Raikage want the Byakugan so bad that he'd kidnap my sister, or me? Why would he steal it like that? She'd been nervous when Kono-kun had suggested this way to find out, but there were times that the cute boy. I did not just think that, she railed at herself, before admitting privately that he was. And his direct attitude made strides that more lateral thinking could not. As the huge dark-skinned man crouched, bringing his eyes to her level, even if his sunglasses hid them, she felt a knot in her stomach. My old man, who had the plan, I don't think he's right, B said. Sorry to say, I don't hold sway, of how he's gonna fight. Don't think he's well, that I can tell, but what I'm gonna say, I apologize, and tell no lies, I won't let him take anyone away. The last line seemed a little rushed, but emphasized. Yugito put her gloved hand on B's shoulder. Hanabi frowned as she thought about this, and looked around at the people who all stood ready to fight if this was a ruse. Deciding the big man was honest, she nodded, and smiled, a shy smile that lit her face up like a sunrise, at least according to Konohamaru. Thank you, Kumo-san, she said. I am sorry to have bothered you. As she turned away, B looked up at Yugito, who nodded. This village had treated them far better, even knowing what they held, than Kumo had, perhaps because of the examples of what a Jinchuriki could do and be, thanks to that Uzumaki boy. Naruto, she thought his name was. B's voice caught the attention of the children and the shinobi standing ready. Oh little sprite, that ain't quite right, foe, what you done ignite, is Yugito and me, the killer bee, are Konohas tonight. We got no name, no claim to fame, but we shall stand and fight. Where does our bro? Him you should know, he does it, 'cause it's right, B rapped, his full heart in it, the words just coming out smoother now he wasn't concentrating on them. So check it out, we roar and shout, and set our goals much higher, to show that we can live as free, and carry your will of fire. Then something happened that had never happened before, at least to B. There was applause. Uzumaki Naruto was enraged when he found the experimental notes pertaining to Karin. He was still a little upset when they activated the explosive and incendiary tags, and overfed them with as much Yuki as chakra. They were, fortunately, a goodly distance away, on a ship carrying him away from the island when he did, and the island ceased to exist. It was doubtful anything larger than a grain of rice remained, and it would have been a very small grain of rice indeed. The shockwave from the explosion was visible in the air, by the 1001 kami, and even a few miles distant was strong enough to shake the ship like a terrier with a rat. Oops, Naruto said from the deck, where he'd landed with Hinata on top of him. I guess I may have overdone it a little. Tsunade glared at the scroll in front of her. It was a message from the Raikage, laying out a list of demands in order to avoid a war between Kumo and Konoha. Item 1 was turning over all Kumo traitors and Jinchuriki in Konoha, at that. Since that would have included Naruto, this was a no-brainer. She was racking her brains to try to come up with a diplomatic way to say, go to Jigoku, when she scanned the next line. Item 2 demanded the turnover of, untainted samples, of the Sharingan and Byakugan to Kumo, and even went so far as to say exactly what such was defined as. Apparently the man didn't believe that Sasuke was dead, or Itachi blind. The only reason the last surviving Uchiha continued to draw breath was the steady flow of information to Ibiki and Jiraiya about the Akatsuki. Throwing the demands into the fire, she picked up a second message, this one from Iwa. Despite the loss of Ishiguma and a tome to Konoha, having them adopted into the Uzumaki clan was a step up in their status, garnering a portion of the healthy respect granted Uzumaki Kushina during her time fighting against them. Unoki, the Tsuchikage, was a shrewd old man who held a grudge as though it was carved in stone, but he was anything but a fool, and since Konoha had 3 of the 9 Jinchuriki within its walls, and as of yesterday, their shinobi ranks as well, he was contemplating a peace treaty that would supersede the one already in existence since the end of the previous Great Shinobi War. He'd even delivered his own intelligence on the probable locations of the other 4 Jinchuriki. Konoha already knew where 3 were, and he wasn't going to expose his 2 to the possibility of being poached from under his nose, which cast a fairly large shadow, if Tsunade remembered right. Sabaku no Gara in Suna, she already knew that. The Sanbi's host was the previous Mizukage, who was dead now, dispersing his Biju. The others were Utakata of Kirigakure no Sato, who was in a self-imposed exile, and likely on the run from Kiri Hunter Nin, and then there was the one in Takigakure no Sato, Fu. At first Tsunade wasn't sure why the old man thought she was collecting all the Jinchuriki, but a few minutes of thought allowed her to see why he might think that. It was all a coincidence, but no one would ever believe that. She really wished there was some other way to protect her people, but it seemed her choices were vanishing fast. Unaware of impending wars, Team Karin raced through the trees, with Hinata carrying Karin while Naruto did the same for Isaribi. The 2 of them were, perhaps oddly to their passengers due to their being the smaller 2 of the team, the strongest physically, not something that either could have boasted as little as 2 months ago. The gates of Konoha were not that far now, beckoning the travelers home. Ichiraku's was busy tonight, with several teams returning from their various missions. Even Team Karin was due back that day, and were likely at the Hokage Tower even now delivering their report. As she thought this, Sakura took up the chopsticks in her left hand, her cloak thrown back over her left shoulder, while still concealing the right side of the kunoichi. Ayami had thoughtfully supplied a bowl that was able to be affixed to the countertop through the use of a suction cup, and the pink-haired girl had become fairly proficient with her formerly bad hand. She'd heard of people being equally good with both hands, and the word for them was ambidextrous, from some foreign tongue where dexter meant right. Apparently everyone was thought to be good with that hand in that culture. So did that mean she'd become ambisinistrous? Sinister meant left in that same language, after all. Hey Sakura, the familiar voice of Naruto rang out, and the girls so named turned. There were Naruto and Hinata, hand in hand, smiling to see a friend. She found herself smiling weakly, and thinking on the past as the couple sat down beside her. Glad to see you got back, too, the blonde Jinchuriki said. We managed our mission for the Hokage fairly well, and we managed the clan mission, too. You were part of the Suna inspection team, right? What news about Gaara? Sakura smirked. Gaara has been much better since he started sleeping regularly, and since he can get sleep, apparently the Ichibi has less of a hold on him now. Temari was flirting with Shikamaru if you can believe it. It only took 3 or 4 games of shogi and another few of go before they really got serious. I spent most of the time I was there with Kankuro and this medic called Usagi. I can't quite recall, he wasn't much help until the end when they fixed it in place, working with this. Somewhat self-conscious, she brought out her new arm from beneath the cloak, revealing it for the first time in Konoha outside the Hokage Tower. Naruto whistled low and long as she did, and Hinata was also impressed. The plates of wood and steel bore a sheen of lacquer, and each piece had been carefully shaped and fitted. To Hinata's eyes, as she wielded her newly named Zen Mishigan, loosely translated to all-seeing purple eyes, the arm held chakra pathways and, not tenketsu, those were fragile things compared to what she saw here. Nodes was the only word that fit. The arm was obviously artificial, and just as obviously a work of art. Even the lacquer had been infused with a certain degree of chakra, and patterns beneath it. There was a cherry tree at Sakura's shoulder, trailing, falling, petals down her arm to the crimson lacquered knuckle plates. The chakra that Sakura used to move the arm was no more than she'd have used moving the real limb, and Hinata could see that it was a fraction, and a tiny fraction at that, of what the arm could bring to bear. Sakura's earth chakra would be able to strengthen the wood and metal of the arm immensely, too. The pink-haired shinobi smiled as the Uzumakis examined her arm. "You think it's cool now? Wait till you see what it has tucked away," she said. "With all the little tricks we managed to work into this, I can never again say there's no tricks up my sleeve." In a hidden cavern, before a huge and ugly statue, the remaining members of Akatsuki gathered. The leader had called them together to discuss what the changes in Konoha would do to their plan. "Should they continue to gather the Jinchuriki at this rate," said the man with a triple-bladed scythe, "they'll have done our work for us, and we can just swoop in, destroy them and take the Biju all at once." "I doubt that, Hidden," replied the one called Sasori. "If they get all 6 surviving Jinchuriki, then the odds are good that they'll pursue the Sanbi when it regenerates in the next few years. On top of that, they destroyed 2 of our more powerful members. Itachi was taken down by that Hyuga girl. Sorry, she's an Uzumaki now, isn't she? And Kisame apparently was overmatched by the Kyuubi's vessel. I don't think we can win if we wait that long. We have to strike soon." Deidara, formerly from Iwa, nodded. He hated agreeing with Sasori on anything, but when he was right. "I don't think 2 of us will be enough," he said as he added his opinion. "Even if one of those 2 is Pain. We really need 2 for each Jinchuriki." Pain, bearer of the Rinnegan, nodded. "We cannot afford for them to acquire more of the Jinchuriki, or they will grow too powerful for us to take. For now, Hidden, Kakuzu, the 2 of you are to seize the Nanabi Jinchuriki while Deidara and Sasori acquire the Ichibi. We cannot extract the Biju yet, but we can imprison their hosts until we need them." Naruto woke with Hinata in his arms, and in the distance heard Tayuya and Karin whispering, trying to keep the noise down. Isaribi was at the hospital being examined by Tsunade and Shizune while the notes on her transformation were explored for clues on reversing the process. So far, the process was incomplete, according to those very notes, and would have to be completed or the girl would eventually grow ill from the incompatibilities between her body's differing natures. The upside to this was that she'd gain the ability to switch back and forth to a fully human form and the Kaima, or Sea Devil, form. Beyond that, there was as yet no cure. Of course, that wouldn't stop the greatest medic nin in the elemental nations from looking, and in the meantime, Isaribi was being taught the shinobi arts. As the couple emerged from their room, the door chimes sounded, and Naruto went to see who it was, even as Hinata began to prepare their breakfast. The Anbu outside the door wore a lion mask, and spoke quickly. "Hokage-sama is calling for Uzumaki Naruto and Hinata to present themselves at the Hokage Tower at 1 hour past noon. It seems the reward for a task well done is another, more difficult task. Good luck, Uzumaki-san." Naruto turned that over in his mind as he ate silently, with his Hinata-chan matching him bite for bite. Not so much the message as the method of delivery. There had been respect and a little awe in the ANBU's voice and mannerisms. It was something new to Naruto's experiences involving the village at large. He'd received it in small doses from Tsunade and Shizune first, and Hiruzen and Jiraiya, and it had been gradually dragged out of Hiashi and Neji, but from people he'd never met. It was a good feeling. It took the urge he'd always had to stop people, no, monsters, like Orochimaru from hurting others and magnified it by 100 times, making it both a need and a source of untapped strength. It was empowering and satisfying. In Tsunade's office, a scroll bearing an offer of alliance sat, waiting on the messengers who would deliver it. A tiny thing, to carry the burden of a shifting destiny, a moment that could, and likely would, change the fate of a world. Kakashi felt the burn as his team pushed themselves hard, training in speed at the same time as they raced back to Suna. His pouch contained the scroll bearing the modified terms of alliance, including the order that would allow their preferred ambassadors to re-enter High no Kuni. He glanced back at his team occasionally, and Kiba was the only one who seemed reluctant in any way. Mostly, that was because he was away from that Fukuro girl, the former Kumo Kunoichi, whose team had been given a mission to Tori no Kuni, an ironic task, given the names of 3/4 of the team involved birds, or possibly an omen, and Kiba was worried about her. From the way the girl was acting around the village, it seemed she felt the same way, and both were too oblivious, and nervous, a big change for Kiba, to notice the other's feelings. Kakashi chuckled inwardly. Everyone had noticed Hinata's crush on Naruto before his abduction almost 5 years ago, except Naruto, and somehow Kiba and Fukuro both managed to fill both roles. Shikamaru seemed eager to get there. That could be to challenge Temari to more strategy games, or it could just be to get there with enough time to properly nap. Since the blonde Suna Kunoichi was one of the few people that could give the young genius a decent match at his favorite games, Kakashi would have put money on the former. Sakura's attitude was a surprising one. It wasn't just an eagerness to be away from Konoha that was motivating her, he could tell. She seemed more driven to get there than to get away. Even though the white-haired Jonin had seen the work of art that her arm was now, he did not delude himself that he knew all the secrets it contained. On top of that, her chakra control had been deemed good enough that she could learn some puppet mastery techniques by Kankuro. She had some medical jutsu under her belt, and of course an instinctive feel for Tsunade strength-enhancing technique as well, but this. Sakura had expressed an idea for designing puppets that could be directed for emergency medical conditions, such as a mobile stretcher, rather than a collapsible stretcher that relied on other ninja to carry it, so that a medic nin could get an injured comrade to medical attention without compromising a unit's fighting strength any further than necessary. Tsunade had given the girl a separate mission scroll to pursue such plans in concert with Suna's medics and puppeteers, sharing out the benefits of that research to both villages, and now the pink-haired Kunoichi was chomping at the bit to get started. Although, Kakashi mused as he returned his attention to their travels, she and Kankuro did work well together, and he did bring her out of her shell with those atrocities of humor that most people call puns. That they also look fairly good together doesn't hurt. Naruto and Hinata were in the vanguard for their team as they sped towards the borders of Taki no Kuni. Like Team Kakashi, they were carrying a diplomatic scroll, an offer of true alliance, along with classified intelligence as an offer of good faith. Of course, none of the shinobi carrying the scroll knew the exact details of the intelligence, but that was to be expected. As they traveled, Shino watched his friends closely. The easy closeness the Uzumaki couple shared was enviable, although he was unsure any girl would be willing to overlook his internal colonies unless she were another Aburame, and even then, it was a careful dance to find someone whose colonies were as compatible as their hosts. The level of dedication the colonies required was not easy to match. Idly, he turned over in his mind all the girls that he knew, both in and outside the clan. Hinata wasn't even considered, in love and married already, but the others. Tenten was older, and seemed more interested in Neji than anyone else, but she was also focused on her shinobi career. Ino was emotionally hurt by Sasuke's death, and Choji seemed to be the one who was helping her the most there. Sakura? Well, his Kakaichu complained about the frequency of her voice as far back as the academy, so he doubted that would happen. Further, Ino and Sakura reacted badly to insects. Among his own clan, his closest in age female cousin was in the same class as Hinata's little sister, and the others were either younger or already attached. Maybe there really would be someone out there for him, but Shino felt lonely, an odd sensation for an Aburame with 2 colonies. Karin was gauging her team's abilities as they sped along. At the last campsite, she'd witnessed Naruto and Hinata both setting their gravity seals to 10 before they began sparring with each other, and it had still taken them 3 hours to tire themselves. Admittedly, that was without heavy jutsu use, as they didn't wish to send up a flare to advertise their location, but they were still in motion and very close to full-on fighting for that time. When she'd asked about their seals being set even higher, she had been surprised at Naruto's answer that it wouldn't be safe. Anything over a 5 isn't safe for most people at any time, Kurenai Taicho, Naruto had said, using the new term of address that had replaced sensei, when it was discovered she had nothing left that she could teach them. It starts to tear ligaments and muscles badly enough to scar at that point. As Hanyu, Hinata and I don't have that problem, of course, but there's more than that to it. Our physical threshold has no upper limit in theory, but our surroundings are not so lucky. If we were to use these seals for anything over a factor of 10 in an unprepared area, we'd be destroying it with every step. On top of that, it's just a theory, but we'd have to step beyond chakra to Yuki, and that could alter us more than we already are. Tails and stuff. So we're holding ourselves to 10 until we can figure it out. Of course, we are wearing weights now. Karin smiled nervously as she passed the branch the Uzumakis had pushed off from for their latest leap. Despite their chakra extending out beneath their feet to strengthen the surface they set foot on, their footprints had still been crushed into the branch's surface. And they were still learning more. Hiden and Kakuzu looked out over the valley. The bloodthirsty cultist could see nothing out of the ordinary, and turned to his companion, not friend, because neither of them wanted any, nor ally, despite their matching goals to serve the leader. In point of fact, Kakuzu had actually killed Hiden a couple of times when he was pushed too far. So, he said, where is this village? Following the other, Akatsuki's pointed finger showed the Jashinist the waterfall. Behind it was a solid cliff, and a massive forest with a canopy that spanned the horizon. There was also more than a little woodland at the base of the cliff, but nothing that matched the mercenary missing nin's descriptions of the great tree. I don't see it, Kakuzu groaned. With Hiden's version of immortality, it was likely he'd have to spend centuries with an eternal moron. That's the point, he snapped. The great tree makes up a large part of the canopy above the falls, and the forest around it conceals the crater in which it sits. There's only one way in or out that doesn't change, the waterfall cave. It wouldn't be Takigakure no Sato if the village wasn't hidden in the waterfall. A similarly argumentative pair were slowly trekking across the sands. So you don't have one of your little meat puppets there? Deidara asked, incredulous. Why not? Sasori rasped out a reply. Because the Jinchuriki roundup that Konoha seems to have embarked on has thrown off all our plans by a considerable margin. I was going to infiltrate in the next few months to plant a sleeper, but with the way things are, we'll have to fight our way in. That's going to be a pain for our leader. Deidara groaned at the puppet master's pun. Old habits died hard it seemed. Why did Suna puppet masters like that infernal form of humor anyway? Was it the satisfaction they got from twisting the language around until it danced to their tune, like any of their other puppets? So, I blow us an entrance, and then we wipe out as many shinobi as get in our way, and we snatch the Ichibi and scram. Is that the plan? We should probably fine-tune it a little, but that's the basic idea, Sasori replied, and the two Akatsuki continued their journey. In far-off Kirigakure no Sato, the new Mizukage opened the large case which held what was left of Sumeida. The blade which devoured chakra had been in the hands of Kisame since the bloodthirsty monster had left their lands so long ago. Now here it was, with 3 great holes gouged through it, close enough to be the same hole. It had been a mortal blow, both for the blade and its wielder, whose head had also been returned with it. As she looked again at the shattered sword, Mei Terumi glanced at the open Kumo bingo book nearby. Pass the word, ow, she ordered. No shinobi under my command is to go after this young man. I don't care how much the Raikage offers, he's off limits. Encounters in the field are strictly limited to observation and intelligence gathering. Considering the penalties and sanctions that Tetsu no Kuni had assessed against Kumogakure, she doubted the Raikage had that much ready coin to pay the bounty. Anyway, the explosion was not the first sign of trouble. Sooner scouts had spotted the 2 Akatsuki agents miles out, aided by jutsu that used the principles of the mirage to see a great deal further than others might expect. Sakura and Kankuro had raced towards the entrance to Suna, each carrying 7 scrolls. Sakura had been working on her new ideas, and Kankuro had seen some potential in them, and taught her how to construct them, as well as adjusting her artificial arm, and its hidden surprises. They arrived at the gates even as the Akatsuki did, and stood and stared at the 2 S-rank criminals that were ready for a fight. Glancing at the walls of the hidden passage between Suna and the desert outside, Sakura spat. This could be a close fight, she said as Kankuro hauled out his combat puppets, and the bulkier figure facing them began to pay closer attention. I blame the narrow minds of our enemies, Kankuro replied. However, before Sakura could speak, their foe did. Our timing may be a little tight, Sasori rasped. Deidara, think you can confine our target alone, or is it too much of a squeeze? The blonde missing nin from Iwa exploded. Why, Why do all you puppeteers have to make those execrable puns? Couldn't you find some other form of humor? He screamed, pulling out a clay sculpture and adding chakra to enlarge it into an odd bird, and leaped aboard as it began to fly, dropping an array of explosive clay spiders as big as a man's head as he passed. None of them would be able to counter this explosive masterpiece. Sakura's arm emerged from beneath her cloak for the first time that fight, a small hatch in the palm opening as she did, and aimed her open hand at the escaping Akatsuki as a stream of senbon was launched by a pair of chakra-powered wheels built into the arm and hand, each of the blonde missing nin's spiders being nailed by at least a half-dozen as he released them, and detonating him prematurely, which set off the bird he was riding. Kankuro, on the other hand, had brought out his puppets, Crow and Black Ant, using them to shield the two Chunin from the explosion. Others around them had time to enact their own defenses, or to evade the blast, but it rained sand and pieces of stone, and likely Deidara, for a few minutes. As the smoke cleared, the other Akatsuki grunted. The flying debris had torn holes in his cloak, revealing large sections of wood, not unlike Sakura's arm, beneath the now tattered garment. Stupid Deidara, he muttered. Who in their right mind rides around on that much explosive? At least he went out with a bang. Tearing the rags of the cloak from himself revealed the scorpion-like puppet body underneath. Since I don't have the time to play nice, he was interrupted by the wave of sand that hammered into him, and began to crush the limbs of his puppet-like body, even as a razor-sharp arc of wind-aspected chakra removed the last third of his tail. HMPH. Too many insects for my taste. I'll just have to withdraw for now. As the missing nin went to leap back from the conflict, Gaara stepped past his brother and the Konoha Kunoichi, and Sakura recognized Kakashi and Kiba's voices from behind them, responding to Shikamaru's from above, where he and Temari glided on her fan as the shadow wielder called out strategies. The grip of the sand Gaara was directing ripped the legs from the wooden body even as the Akatsuki collapsed on the sand. The snap of hidden catches was extraordinarily loud as the body before them burst open down its back. The apparently young man who leaped from the body began to run, at impossible speeds, away from Suna. Gaara's control of the sand around him wouldn't allow that, however, and pulled the fleeing puppet master's legs deeper into the desert sands, even as a hatch opened in Sasori's arm and sprayed a hail of senbon, not unlike Sakura had earlier. There was no thought on Gaara's part as his sand automatically jumped to protect him, but with his vision obscured, even for a brief period, he couldn't direct it. Temari couldn't use her fan either, not without dropping herself and Shikamaru to the ground a good ways down, and so couldn't push the needles aside. The other ninja, including Kakashi and Kiba, along with Akamaru, of course, ducked to one side or the other of the passage, and were thus safe that way. Kankuro had no such protections, no such defenses, and a good number of senbon headed his way. He couldn't even interpose his puppets from their current positions in time. Sakura moved. Somehow she tucked Kankuro's head under her left arm as she pushed chakra recklessly into her body, and used it to trigger another feature of her artificial arm as she pulled the Suna ninja down with her, slamming her right elbow ahead of them as several plates of her arm sprang out to form a shield, keeping the hail of needles from her and Kankuro. Shield of cherry blossom steel. They'd missed him, but not by much. When the bird detonated, he'd used the Kawarimi no Jutsu to swap places with some poor sap of a Sunanin, and even at that he'd taken a measure of the explosion, losing his entire left arm to the blast. It looked like he had two options. First, he could conceal himself, and assess the threat these people possessed, and maybe even distract them from Sasori's plan, probably by blowing up some insignificant landmark, like Suna, and snatching the Ichibi Jinchuriki in the chaos. Second, he could run away, after gathering suitable intelligence on these defenders. The big problem was, either way, only one of them was likely to get away. Sasori turned as he recovered his footing. Sand skimming or no, giving Gaara more sand to bury him with was not a good plan. Dividing the enemy was. So his spray had two targets. If only that blasted Yura hadn't been killed during the invasion of Konoha, he could have made him take out the sentries, and this fight would have been so different. When the girl's arm had first shown up, he'd wondered if there was somebody else who'd stumbled over his flesh to puppet apotheosis, but discarded the thought when a flying shard of rock had clipped her cheek in the explosion. Puppets don't bleed. Then her action in protecting the Suna puppeteer had revealed her arm was more than a one-trick pony, as the saying ran. The shield had been very impressive, and as it collapsed back into the arm's plates, he had to admit he was impressed. Opening his robes, he pulled out the first of his scrolls, whipping it open and deactivating the storage seals as he did, even as the spike-headed cable usually coiled in his torso dug into the stone of the cliff near the passage entrance and lifted him over the incoming spears of sand that Gaara was directing. The figure that appeared from the scroll struck Kankuro mute with fear for a moment, before he cursed volubly. "Crap," he muttered, and only Sakura was close enough to hear him, dusting the sand off her side as they stood. "That's the Sandemi Kazekage. We never knew where he'd gone. All this time. This is really bad." Deidara had discarded his Akatsuki robe and the scarred Hitai-8, sealing him away quickly as he snatched some headgear from a nearby store. The civilians who ran it had fled at the first signs of trouble, and the Hitai-8 of a fallen shinobi completed the look as the blonde man slipped into place among the Suna ranks, his missing arm replaced by a hasty sculpture of his detonating clay. He was starting to run low on that, too, having enough left for 1 bird or 8 spiders, besides his pre-prepared, big finisher. He just needed to see what Sasori's chances were, though, as the pair had never met this kind of trouble before. Their specialties had their place, and they could cover each other flaws, but this was strictly speaking, a first for them. While they had been trained and briefed incredibly well, there was no one left in their organization with any actual experience in fighting Jinchuriki, that he knew of, except possibly Kakuzu. No one was sure how long that ninja had been alive. Still, Sasori bringing out that puppet was a bad sign. If he also brought out the 100 puppet performance, Deidara would just cut his losses and escape. The smell of blood hung heavy in the air as Team Karinai reached the valley where they were supposed to meet their escort. Glancing at each other, knowing that this was a bad sign, they began to move forwards, heading for the secondary rendezvous, a clearing somewhat closer to the center of Taki no Kuni, picking up speed as the sounds of battle rang through the air. The clearing itself was not empty, with 2 men in tattered black and red cloaks who were fighting hard against several ninja with the Taki Hitai-8 on their brows. The taller of the two was clashing with a teenager, around the same age as the Konoha Chunin, with green hair, clad in a white, midriff-bearing top and pants combo. She was struggling, flagging fast, and fighting as if she was scared to use everything she had. Her foe had no such problems, and although fighting her had not been a free ride, he was overwhelming her. The other Akatsuki was strange as he hurled his triple-bladed scythe, swinging it by the long cable attached to the haft and barely scratching the frantically evading Taki shinobi. A quick tug sufficed to return his weapon, as he grinned, and he licked the blood from the blade in a disturbing way, laughing as he did, stepping into a strange diagram stained onto the earth beneath him in blood. His skin turned black to accent his gray hair, and white lines formed on his skin, loosely matching up with his bones, Naruto guessed. What he did next was insane, for as they watched, he activated a spring-loaded blade in the rod at the other end of the cable on his scythe, and then, crying out, "All glory for Jashin-sama," drove it through his own heart, stiffening and collapsing backwards as he did. 3 was a scream as the last Taki ninja, with the exception of the girl fighting the other Akatsuki, died, blood fountaining from a stab to his chest that had no explanation. "This is going to get tricky," Karinai said, recalling the short descriptions from the bingo books. "These 2 don't generally leave witnesses." The missing nin still standing, Kakuzu, she thought his name was, lashed out with a rapid strike that hammered the green-haired girl against a tree, an action that strained her ability to remain conscious too far, and she passed out, collapsing to the ground in a heap. Naruto stretched out his senses, trying to see if she was still alive, even as Hinata's Zenmi Shigan spotted the color of her chakra as it faded back to blue from a deep, verdant, forest green. She also saw the assailant had multiple cauldrons, the centers of chakra that poured it into the rest of the system, although 2 of his remaining 3 seemed to be linked in a very strange way, almost as if they didn't really belong to him. He also showed signs of having had 2 more such outside cauldrons which had been destroyed recently. She glanced at her husband and nodded, confirming his guess, even as a thin, soft wave of chakra washed past them, and the remaining man turned in their direction. "Hidden, you idiot," he said in a very harsh and angry tone. "Get up, we're not alone here." What happened next was assuredly not what anyone expected. The second Akatsuki, the one who'd stabbed himself, apparently killing himself to kill the Taki ninja, sat up and complained. "What do you care, Kakuzu? We'll just kill em all for Jashin-sama's glory, and then we drag that demon bottle back to the leader, and it's done." "We can't do that, you fool," Kakuzu replied, wishing he could afford to kill this nuisance a few times himself. Two of them feel like Jinchuriki, and you know Konoha's been trying to catch them all for themselves. Karin couldn't see this going well at all. Shino, you and I get to stop the tall one. Hinata interrupted her. That's a bad idea, Karin Taicho, she whispered. He has more than one cauldron, so he'll just rip through your genjutsu like a kunai through rice paper. You and Shino would be best set to deal with the other one, but be careful. I can't see any chakra in him at all. Naru-kun and I will hold off this Kakuzu, and you can help us once you've dealt with the other one. Neither of the young shinobi couple waited for the plan to be confirmed, and Karin had to admit that their argument made sense, even as all four Konoha ninja burst from the trees to join the fight. Kakuzu saw the way the Konoha shinobi had split up and cursed. He recognized the blasted Uzumaki couple that had put paid to Itachi and Kisame, and recognized their power, even if it felt like two Jinchuriki now, but why couldn't he feel the Kyuubi? The girl beside him was the container of the Nanabi, and even though she was unconscious he could sense the demon, tucked away, deep inside her seal. So not sensing the demon in the boy was troubling. On top of that, how had the girl become a Jinchuriki? It was supposedly impossible for someone above a few months old to receive such a seal as would hold one of the Biju, and the fact that she felt like one. Had Konoha had two Jinchuriki all along, and did that mean the leader's intelligence was faulty? The gleam of purple where the girl's eyes were confused him a little, but not enough to lose focus, and even as Naruto formed the hand seal and called up scores of Kage Bunshin, sending them into battle to test the Akatsuki shinobi, Kakuzu pondered, didn't the brat marry a Hyuga? A Hyuga. The missing nin's eyes snapped to the girl, and sure enough spotted the slightly bulging vein-like chakra coils feeding her eyes. She had to go first, before anything else happened. There was a bright side, though. If he and Hiden could win this, they could collect quite a bounty here. Hinata and Naruto saw the realization hit Kakuzu, his reaction screaming out that he knew she saw the extra cauldrons which, if Naruto was recalling the information forced into his head by Tsunade, so long ago, meant that there had to be some kind of extra organ there to generate them. A simple replacement was melded into the original chakra network in the case of transplants. And that organ had to be capable of keeping someone alive, which meant a heart or brain. Most likely hearts, as brains were supposed to bring residual memories and impulses from the previous owner of the organ. Reaching out with his whisker sense, which he'd had more experience with than Hinata, he pushed out his own chakra towards their enemy, tasting the resonance returning from him. This guy was strong. His chakra reserves weren't in the same league as Kisame, for example, but he had a lot of power available, even after fighting for who knew how long, and he had strong affinities for water, fire and earth, with traces of wind and lightning, as if he'd had those affinities and they'd been burned out or something similar. Even as Naruto was brining his bone metal claws out, Hinata was moving in the defensive motions of her gentle storm style, flowing like water from place to place as needed, and although their foe wasn't giving any chances for her to counterstrike, she was managing to hold him off. There was something wrong with his chakra network, too, and she delved deeper, trying to spot the exact difference, but the slight dip in her focus was enough for one of Kakuzu's attacks to get through her defenses. The strike didn't hit, however, as Naruto's claws, powered up with wind chakra, sheared through the arm, severing the limb and sending it off at an angle to the intended strike, and giving the Akatsuki ninja pause for a fraction of a second before he leaped back, reassessing the situation, even as black, thread-like tendrils emerged from both edges of the wound, reattaching the arm as if nothing had happened. That was a major clue for Hinata as she muttered what she found. It's almost as if he has three separate chakra systems, Naru-kun, she said. He definitely has three different cauldrons, and they're all attached to his main network. He can probably live through losing two of them. Naruto finished her train of thought. But all three, let's see what happens. Tsunade glared at the messages before her. One had been sent from Taki Gakure, and the other from Sunagakure, and neither carried good news. They had been sent by summon creatures, a much faster and more desperate method than the usual messengers, and a clear sign that things were not going well. Taking barely a moment to glance at the active duty chart on the wall, the Godava Hokage pressed a button on her desk and snapped orders into the intercom. Shizune, I need a messenger hawk ready to go in 5 minutes, attuned to Maito Gai, and send for Team A immediately. She was already scrawling the message in a broad, clear hand, to redirect Team Gai towards Suna to reinforce Team Kakashi, while she went over what orders she'd give A and his team for this mission. These Akatsuki were really getting on her last nerve. The iron sand the puppet controlled was a problem, Sakura realized quickly, and not one that was easy to overcome. She could feel the magnetic field that shaped it into the vast number of spears that then rained towards them by the pull on her arms, shoulder and knuckle plates, and was running her old-school lessons on magnetism through her head. There were a number of ways to break up a magnetic field, but only a few of them were lasting. But the secret wasn't to attack the sand, she realized, but the puppet. Leaping upward, she clung to the wall of the passage as she signaled to Shikamaru, and the lazy strategist nodded, tapping on Temari's shoulder as the two dropped to the passage floor. Gaara's sand had grabbed at the iron sand, pinning it in place as best he could, even as Sasori lashed out with hidden blades at Kankuro and his puppets. Sakura crouched, pushing chakra into her legs at the same time as she poured it into her arm, the earth-aspected energies strengthening both the material, and the muscles, of twisted cable inside the artificial limb. The opening was incredibly small, as Temari combined her wind scythe jutsu with a hasty flamethrower technique from Shikamaru, directing the resulting superheated fire at the mass of sand and powdered iron that hung between Gaara and the puppet Kazekage, fusing it into a single immovable lump, one that disrupted the magnetic fields with its very existence. Kankuro's puppets were being shattered as Sakura launched herself up the wall of the passage, charging towards the puppet from behind the massive lump of glass and steel as it fell, and struck hard. Pushing more chakra into her fist, she slammed it into the center of the puppet, right on top of the kanji on the chest, the character for iron, and scattering the pieces of the puppet far and wide. In doing so, however, she was scratched in several places by fragments of the now broken construct, and the thin purple film on some of the sharper pieces entered her bloodstream. It hurt, it burned like nothing she'd ever experienced before, and all the strength she possessed fled her limbs as she fell to the sand below. As the girl fell, to be caught by the now puppetless Kankuro, who promptly fed her a broad-spectrum antidote, Sasori wasted half a moment regretting that he hadn't perfected his latest poisonous concoction, which would have rendered the antidote useless, before turning his attention to the remaining shinobi, and the gathering Suna ninja, equivalent to Konoha's Anbu, and pulled a scroll from his back, unraveling it with his left hand as he opened the right side of his chest. The scroll released 100 puppets in red cloaks, and the opening in his torso released a similar number of chakra strings, and even as he called out, "Performance of the 100 puppets," Shikamaru's shadow stabbed into his own, freezing him to the spot before the strings could connect, allowing Kankuro to steal control of 2 puppets, armed with what looked like chains, and begin to confine the motionless marionettes. "Hurry!" yelled the lazy strategist. "I can't hold him long, he's too strong." Deidara had seen enough. He'd been quietly working his clay. Spiders are a bird, he still hadn't decided, until Sasori's 100 puppets were brought out. Shit, he thought harshly, that's a bad sign, and the leader won't want to leave anything for questioning. Oh, well, it's Sasori, I never liked him much anyway. The clay bird appeared, and he leaped onto its back, staying well above the fighting, and taking advantage of the momentary surprise to dash past both defenders and puppets alike, pulling out his big finisher as he raced over Sasori's head, and activating it as he threw it over his shoulder. To say the explosion was big would have been like referring to the ocean as a little damp, or midday in K's no Kuni as a little warm. The detonation didn't just drive the very sand of the desert in waves, but also reached a sufficient temperature to turn it to glass, not a pure, clear glass such as Suna glassblowers could produce, but the dirty, cracked and bubbled stuff that could be found after a lightning strike. Sasori and his puppets absorbed the shock wave unprotected, consumed by the detonation's heat and force, and Gaara barely got a barrier of sand in place to protect those in the passage, one he had to continually replenish as the heat from the blast converted the sand into glass from the heat. By the time the destructive blast had finished, the passage into Suna had been sealed with a solid glass barrier some 20 feet thick, or thereabouts, and Deidara had gotten away. Of Sasori and his puppets, not a single trace would be found. Karin gave up the genjutsu as a bad idea. It just wasn't working, as whatever kept this hidden going in place of chakra pretty much ignored her attempts to connect her illusion techniques to it. On top of that, she and Shino were constantly forced to dodge the scythe that the missing nin wielded with abandon. He didn't even seem to care about the depth of the blow, or where it struck. Struck by an inspiration, she poured most of her chakra into her next genjutsu, a simple illusion that had a unique trait, for all that it couldn't affect a large area. It didn't alter the senses of her target, but instead created an actual visual illusion. In this case, as she dodged the next scythe sweep by her extremely narrow margin, she actually felt the cloth of her right sleeve part, but the blade missed the skin. She created the image of blood on the scythe. On seeing this, the Akatsuki ninja immediately caught the scythe and quickly licked the blade, tasting nothing. Shino, the Konoha Genjutsu mistress, called out, "Why do you think he did that?" On-the-fly analysis was more his strong suit than hers, and she would be a fool not to take advantage of that fact. Yuhi Kurenai was many things, but fool was decidedly not among them. The blood must be needed for something, the young Aburame said quietly. Perhaps to form some kind of metaphysiological link between the donor and the recipient, most likely through the use of whatever form of energy he uses instead of chakra. It isn't chakra or yuki, both of which Hinata could sense, and I doubt it would be Shen, or divine energy. But to get that effect we observed earlier. I wonder. Kurenai Taicho, I have an idea. Dodging a slash from the frustrated scythe-wielding maniac, the Jonin Kunoichi nodded, giving her subordinate the go-ahead, and Shino unleashed a massive wave of insects that swarmed the missing nin as he flailed wildly with his scythe, and even as Shino began a set of hand signs, Hidden burst from the cloud of Kakaichu beetles and rushed the Chunin, who brought out his own weapons and began a defensive dance as he bought time for his insects to return. No sooner had the Kakaichu swarm returned than Hidden's scythe slipped past Shino's guard, tearing at his arm and drawing blood before Hidden leaped back, licking at the precious liquid, savoring the coppery tang that told him it was really blood, even as Shino dropped to one knee and clutched his arm, and the Akatsuki shinobi stepped back into his ritual circle as his flesh once again turned black, and the white lines over his bones, and the section of white over his face, appeared. As the strange man removed a collapsing blade from his robe, he laughed maniacally as Kurenai moved to help Shino. "Prepare for the afterlife, you little shit," Hidden screamed, not wanting to prolong this ritual too much with the Jonin still running loose, as he plunged the spike into his own heart. Hinata had managed to pinpoint what was wrong with this man's chakra system. He didn't have any tenketsu. The chakra came from the cauldrons and simply circulated through a legion of extra fine coils that resembled nothing so much as threads. That caused her a problem, as without tenketsu, her usual targets were gone, and with the way those threads kept shifting around, she was fairly certain they could replace and replicate themselves fast enough that the only really vulnerable points would be the hearts. Kakuzu moved fast, knowing that a Hyuga, even if she had some kind of henge to disguise her eyes, could well unravel the secrets behind his power, and charged at the girl. His assault was pure taijutsu, and he knew she was too green, too unschooled to withstand it, but at the same time he wasn't going to make the mistake of underestimating her, and he drove his leg forward in a snap kick of devastating force, that struck something hard and immovable. Naruto stood before the missing nin, his arms crossed before him, plated with bone metal that extended up from his wrists, now receding back into his arms as the Jinchuriki released the chakra shaping the plates, with Kakuzu's foot at full extension resting on the cross. He swung both hands across and outward, severing the leg as the missing nin jumped back, threads reaching out and reattaching the limb before he landed. Then two large bundles of the threads pushed up above the shoulders of the Akatsuki ninja, each bearing a mask representing some animal. The mouths of the masks dropped open as they aimed roughly at the Uzumaki couple as they stood before him, and as the red-mouthed mask seemed to gather fire in front of it, the brown-striped one fed earth, in the form of stone and dirt, into the flames, and Kakuzu unleashed a seal-less jutsu, even as Naruto and Hinata frantically raced through the hand signs for their own jutsu. Yoten, pyroclastic wave, the Akatsuki bounty hunter roared, and a gout of superheated lava shot towards the two Konoha ninja, where it met their answering defense. Suten, tidal wall, Hinata yelled, raising a massive wall of water that she sent coursing towards the lava stream, and Naruto plunged his hands into the water, calling out, Raiten, static separation. As it passed, the water, charged by lightning, continued to barrel towards Kakuzu, who raised a water wall of his own, disrupting the lava stream as it went, and turning to vapor on the way. The cloud settled around Kakuzu, as he dropped his water wall, seeing the near-transparent fog as no threat, and the fire mask opened its mouth again, and the fire gathered once more for the lava technique. The explosion certainly took the man off guard, a massive blast of flame that slammed the Akatsuki heart thief to the ground even as the detonation consumed the two masks and the hearts behind them. Although Kakuzu was fast enough to put himself in a reversed water prison, preserving his life, for now. With the other masks ripped away from him, until he had the time to replace the missing hearts, he was the weakest he'd been in years. Glaring at the two Chunin who'd brought him to this, he snarled out his question. How? Basic chemistry, Naruto answered. You better believe I paid attention about how to make things explode. When you run the right electrical current through water or steam, you get two colorless gases, very excitable ones, that will explode with the slightest spark, which you so thoughtfully supplied. You're still in over your heads, child, sneered the bounty hunter. If I can't capture you, I'll just have to kill you. According to my sources, the Kyuubi, whichever one of you is carrying it, will regenerate in the next 10 years or so. No big loss. He raised his hands and started a very potent jutsu. He hadn't needed hand signs for decades, and now, the first sign Hidden had that something was wrong, was the lack of bleeding in the boy. Despite the blade piercing his heart, the boy wasn't reacting at all, except to burst into a swarm of insects surrounding a log as the real Shino emerged from the trees, startling the Jonin woman. And the pain, while much of a rush as ever, wasn't fading, and he was starting to feel cold. The injury wasn't healing, either. Jashin? The zealot asked, as blood gouted up his throat to pour from his mouth. What's happening? Why have you forsaken me? The young Aburame spoke up. I apologize if I worried you, Kurenai Taicho, but I needed to see if the signature of the source would have a negative feedback effect on the wielder of the jutsu. I had my Kakaichu harvest some of his blood when they swarmed him, and they smeared it on his blade when I substituted for the bugs and the log. It seems that his jutsu sacrifices another's potential lifespan to extend his, but now, he just sacrificed himself, forever. The loop is constant now, and what would be recovered is taken away just as fast, leaving him with his original life force, which, since Hinata-san told us he has no chakra of his own, is none. Still, if you would be so kind, Kurenai raised her hands and flickered them through the signs of a jutsu. Katen, Phoenix Firestorm. In moments, there was nothing left of the Jashinist, and the two raced over to their teammates. Sutan, Grand Deluge. The massive outpouring of water, a veritable torrent on a primordial level, cascaded towards Kakuzu's opponents, and he turned towards his prize, only to hear a calm and collected young man's voice. Doton, shattered ground. The earth beneath his feet rumbled and split, splintering into a deep pit that sucked away all the water, courtesy of that boy in the dark glasses, even now standing between Kakuzu and the Jinchuriki he'd been sent for, who was being woken by the Konoha Jonin, and stared groggily at the Aburame and his beetles who even now buzzed around him. As the Akatsuki ninja fell, plummeting into water that was waist-deep, the three members of Team Kurenai glanced at each other and nodded. There was one jutsu they all knew, and now they flickered through the hand signs in perfect synchronization. Kakuzu was stepping up onto the surface of the water as they finished and unleashed the jutsu, with one foot still below the surface, and his threads emerging from every parting point in his body, absolutely drenched, and there was nothing he could do, as three voices called out as one. Reitan, Lightning Spear. The roar of the thunder accompanying the lightning was deafening, the flare of three lightning bolts that blended as one washed the area in a light so bright everything was in some shade of white and all shadows were banished, and the scream of the one called Kakuzu was never heard at all. The aftermath was a real drag, mused Shikamaru. It was going to take days, if not weeks, for the Sunagakure craftsmen to clear the passage enough for the Konoha diplomats to return home with their reports, although a messenger hawk would be dispatched to deliver a preliminary report. The arrival of Team Guy outside the glass barrier hadn't helped, either. It hadn't taken long for the Konoha backup to find the gigantic glass flower that had been left behind by the massive explosion, and crossing it had been a simple task, if a hot one. The midday sun in K's no Kuni heated the glass to a scorching temperature, nearly enough to burn their feet through their sandals. It was quickly determined that it would be far more efficient to simply carve out a new passage some distance from the glass, and the young Nara had been the one to suggest it. The Suna Ninja Council had stepped up and nominated a Godava Kazekage. Gaara, of all people, but he turned down the position. I have not earned it, the Ichibi Jinchuriki had said. I do not possess the skills or patience for it, nor the experience. Should I be offered the position of Rokudaime at some future time, perhaps I will feel differently, but for now, no. The council had reluctantly released their plans for Gaara's ascension to the post, and had instead been persuaded to consider another, a man who was known for his neutral stance, but had refused to leave Gaara unburdened by some duty, and appointed his team to diplomatic duties, and when Team Kakashi had presented the scroll lifting the protocols against Suna Ninja in Hai no Kuni, that was their first assignment. Kankuro was further ordered to follow up on the Medi puppet designs in the village with the best medic nin in the elemental nations. Konoha. Deidara was not looking forward to his report. Just a week ago, he'd thought this would be easy, and bragged and shot off his mouth, and now he was forced to tell everyone they'd failed, against a single Jinchuriki, even if said Jinchuriki had been backed up by several skilled, if unknown, ninja. As he spoke to the people still in the chamber, he looked around. Considering that the location of this stronghold was closer to Suna than to Taki, and that the other Akatsuki pair preferred walking, he was sure they would be here as projections, if nothing else, but the absence of Hiden and Kakuzu could be attributed to a number of causes, such as a close pursuit, so he didn't pay it much mind. This is troubling, said the leader, turning to the member who most resembled some kind of Venus flytrap. Zetsu, locate the other two. If they're having trouble with pursuers, assist them, and get the Nanabi back here at once. I stared at the carnage that had been wrought inside Takigakure, great swaths of destruction and devastation. Many of the shinobi here had been killed, and those who remained were no friend to the green-haired girl, Fu. The elders of the village were adamant, and the two biggest supporters of the Taki Jinchuriki were dead, at the hands of the two Akatsuki. His team had arrived mere minutes after the two Akatsuki had been dealt with, and there was little left to do but the cleanup. Fu and the exhausted team Kurenai had needed someone to watch over them as they rested. Naruto and Hinata had recovered the fastest, of course, although the green-haired Jinchuriki wasn't that far behind. Killer Bee had whistled low at the accomplishments of the younger shinobi. Dang, boy, you done kicked ass, I guess your first score is a pass, he'd rapped, prompting Yugito to jab his ribs with her fingertips. Naruto had merely nodded, and snuggled closer to Hinata. The mass memorial for the fallen Taki ninja was the next day, and the elders had looked over the proposal of alliance with Konoha before rejecting it. The monster is the source of the trouble we just went through, one particularly odious old woman said. We have stricken it from our shinobi roster and it will be executed to ensure no one ever uses it against us. The four demon-touched Konoha shinobi nearly lost their tempers at that, but fortunately A came to the rescue. If she isn't on your roster, she can't be one of your missing nin, right? He asked, nodding at his brother, who grinned and waved his hand behind him at Team Kurenai's Chunin. So if we just found a strange girl on our way to Konoha, and adopted her, then you couldn't call out anyone for her, unless you wanted to go up against the strongest hidden village in the elemental nations worth the name. Am I right? The elders nodded reluctantly. That may be true, but first the Jinchuriki would have to escape our village's cells. Kurenai had seen her two Hanyu Chunin sneak out, replaced quietly by two of Shino's bug clones under henge illusions to seem like the young couple, so she was somewhat expecting what happened next. A Taki shinobi stumbled into the chambers, shouting as he did. Honored elders. The Jinchurikis escaped. Two demons helped it. They broke through the doors and then they all went up the great tree, trying to escape along the branches to reach the outside. The panic that commenced covered the re-entry of the two Uzumaki ninja, who switched with the bug clones, raising Kurenai's suspicions, even as one of the more level-headed elders took charge. Enough. You. He pointed at the new shinobi. Escort these outsiders from the village, and make sure they leave Taki no Kuni. Everyone else, organize the search and pursuit teams. He paused and looked over at the shinobi who'd raised the alarm, the one he'd just tasked with removing the foreign ninja from his nation. Which way did these demons go? The shinobi swallowed. They were heading south, so they might have been heading for Hai no Kuni, but that might be a ruse. If the trail were to vanish, most trackers would keep going in an attempt to pick it up later, but if they instead go somewhere else? I couldn't say. I'm just a Chunin, sir. No matter, the elder snorted. I doubt they'd actually be going to Konoha now. But those are the shorter branches, and from there they have easy access to such villages as Oto, Suna and Iwa. You have your task, Chunin, perform it. With that, the elders swept out, ignoring the Konoha entourage as they trailed behind the Chunin. They managed to maintain the pretense long enough to be halfway to the border before Fu dropped her henge of a nondescript Taki Chunin, and Naruto filled them in on the events and the plan. If their search parties are ahead of us, they can't find our tracks properly, so I sent a few clones along the branches with orders to disperse once they cleared the edge and left a bit of a trail towards Iwa. After that, Fu hanged so we could have them order her to escort us out, although that was a bit of a gamble, but the way they were treating us, I figured they wouldn't want strangers around while they dealt with the dirty laundry. Since they already removed her from their roster, that means she's free to choose where she wants to go. Fu herself put her own opinion in. Konoha is as good as any and better than many, she said. If they don't want me, then at least I'll get the chance to think about where to go. You're not going to like hearing this, Zetsu snarled at Pain. Hiden and Kakuzu won't be coming back. They were beaten. Somehow they killed Hiden, and were able to make it stick. On top of that, they took down Kakuzu as well. Admittedly, they were both weakened somewhat by the assault on Taki to get the Nanabi, but dead is still dead. The leader of the Akatsuki swore to himself. If it hadn't been for Tobi stumbling across the Rokubi Jinchuriki in Cha no Kuni, this would have been a massive problem. They couldn't seal the Biju into the statue yet, as it needed the previous 5 Biju to warm it up, to the point where the statue wouldn't simply explode, and each Biju would take progressively longer to seal. 3 days for the Ichibi, 5 for the Nibi, 7 for the Sanbi and so on. But the whole situation was bad. Right now, Konoha had over half of the Biju, a balance in power he thought he could use, were it not for a single glaring fact. Konoha had never started a war, despite their comparative power being greater than the other great hidden villages, but they had a distressing tendency of finishing them. The only time in the past century that Konoha had been the aggressor had been the strikes of retribution for their fallen ally, Uzashigakure. It was looking more and more like the Akatsuki would have to strike at Konoha directly, and that would require time and planning.